Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. My name is Megha Sharma. I'm an undergraduate student from Heriot-Watt University in Dubai, where I study computer science and act as a school officer for the School of Mathematical Sciences. I'm really excited to have a discussion about tech and tech careers with Sarah Mathieson, the Chief of the Data Analysis Unit at the United Nations Joint Staff Pension Fund. So Talking Tech is a series that celebrates girls and young women in tech, being recorded around the world from Girls in ICT Day 2020 to 2022. This day is an international day that's marked on the fourth Thursday of every April. So for this year, it was on 22nd April 2021. And the objective of the Girls in ICT Day is to essentially create a global environment that empowers and encourages girls and young women to consider studies and careers in the growing field of information communication technology. The series is brought to you by the ITU, UNICC, and the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and is in support of Equals, the Global Partnership for Gender Equality in the Digital Age. So now I'm going to give a brief introduction on Sarah, who leads the actuarial and data analysis function for the fund. She's worked in the UK, Germany, and India in a variety of roles from traditional actuarial functions to corporate finance, sales, marketing, customer service, public policy, and research. She studied mathematics and theoretical physics as an undergrad and later qualified as an actuary, then completed her MBA a few years later. So, hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Megha, and thanks for having me here today. I'm really excited to be part of Talking Tech, and hopefully we'll be, trying to inspire the next generation of women into technology careers, but actually, STEM subjects more generally as well.
Yeah.
As you said, I'm currently Chief of the Data Analysis Unit at the United Nations Joint Staff Pension Fund, so I'm essentially a UN staffer. But I should say that today I'm here speaking very much in a personal capacity, and I'm not representing, the United Nations in any way. And this is very much about sharing my personal experience, through the sort of varied career that I've had.
Yeah. I mean, your personal career itself is like so vast and so interesting because you went from one degree in undergraduate to a completely different career. And even within actuary itself, you worked in so many different departments. I think the specific thing that caught me was your undergrad degree because it's so different from the rest of your career, right? You went and studied mathematics and theoretical physics, and then you developed a career in actuary. So what actually motivated that shift in you? And how did you go about building a career with such a varied approach instead of like the narrow focus that people generally have?
I know we spoke about this a little bit when we were preparing for the interview today, that one of the things I was really interested in, quite early on in my teenage years was around, astronomy and space science. And that's actually what led me initially to do a maths and physics degree. And I was very interested in, let's say, that, the kind of wider universe and what's out there. And actually, probably for most of my undergraduate degree, that probably might have been the route that I ended up going down, and more on the sort of, particularly on the research side, actually within physics. But then, probably towards the end of my undergraduate degree, when I was doing maths and theoretical physics, I had the opportunity to work in an insurance company as a summer job, and I just being a normal summer student, having that as a job over the summer vacation. And actually, I worked with an actuary in that organisation and started to see actually how mathematics and analytical skills could be used in business, and actually like the buzz and actually the interaction with people in an office environment. And so in fact, while I was very interested in, going down a research route initially, I actually liked the idea of being able to use my mathematical ability in a business environment. And I could see how an actuarial career would probably allow me to do that a lot more than other, I suppose, business careers around at that time. And probably it was just, the choice was maybe between becoming an actuary or going down the accountancy route, actually becoming an accountant. But actually I could see with that actuarial studies that it was going to sort of play more into the sort of modelling and very much more the kind of, I guess, a sharper end of that kind of analytical skills that, I'd acquired pretty much through my high school and university years. At that point, really, as I was coming towards the end of my university, that was the point when I decided I wanted to go down the route of training to be an actuary. And I also liked the idea of having a professional qualification as well. And that I had this as something that, was kind of recognised around the world, could potentially transferable, but also the sense of that community and being part of a group of professionals that I could learn from and interact with. So it was no longer about me, sitting in an ivory tower, going down a research route, if you like, but actually, interacting day to day with colleagues, with customers. And that actually really motivated me to go down the route of being an actuary as my career choice at that time. I have to say, I mean, my career as an actuary maybe hasn't been typical of a lot of actuaries, in that I qualified as an actuary, but then I sort of moved into sort of less traditional roles. I've worked in different parts of an organisation. I haven't always worked in very traditional actuarial fields, and I guess traditionally actuaries were more involved in the sort of more mathematical modelling side of insurance, particularly around sort of valuing the sort of liabilities and assets of an insurance company or a pension fund for that matter, and perhaps spending a lot of time working with models and really working with numbers actually for a good part of the day-to-day role, and sort of pulling together finance, economics, demographics, and sort of projecting into the future and trying to make sense of it. And while I did do that and still do a little bit of that actually in my current role, actually I was very lucky to have had the opportunity to work in a sales environment, in a marketing area, in customer service. So what that did was it gave me a very broad view of how an organization functions, and actually also gave me a very broad view on how technology is applied in those different settings as well. And particularly in take customer service, for example, where you were seeing certain technological processes being put in place to allow customer cases to be processed a lot quicker without dealing with a human being, customer self-serving. So I was seeing a lot of technology coming in probably in every different aspect of the organisations I was working in. And actually what I suppose what I enjoy about my role that I have today, but also the roles I've had in the past as well, is that I feel I'm able to use my actuarial qualification as a sort of basis and as a background to what I'm trying to achieve. I'm sort of there to try and help solve problems and use my analytical abilities to help organisations solve problems and move things forward, and try and deal with a lot of complexity and bringing things together and pushing it forward that way. And so it's, I'm saying I've not had a sort of typical actuarial career. Actually, I've sort of just gone with the flow a lot of the time, and the opportunities have presented themselves and I've just grabbed them. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. We don't necessarily have some big grand plan about what we're expecting to do in our career, but actually, things just present themselves. And I suppose what I'd also say is that, particularly for some of our viewers today, there'll be things coming along in the future that we could never have possibly imagined as a result of technological advancements in the environment we're operating in. And so actually we need to be open to those opportunities, and what we don't know what types of jobs are going to exist in the future. And actually what I've tried to do along the way is ensure that I've had an eye on my transferable skills, and that I've just kind of had an eye on what interests me and motivates me and gives me that variety that I like. And actually it's been very satisfying. And while I'd originally started off thinking I want to be in a career that I can use my maths, my numerical ability in some way, it's been so much more than that, and been really, really satisfying. And actually had the opportunity to work around the world as well, and work with a wide variety of people. And actually it's this sort of interaction with lots of different people and human beings. And I know we're talking about technology, but actually it still comes down to human beings. It still comes down to that.
We're the ones who created the technology, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. It still comes back to that human interaction. But obviously, Megha, for you're at the start of your career, and I'm really, really jealous, because I think the opportunities that will exist for you will just be so much more than there even was for me. But what sort of motivated you to study computer science as part of your undergraduate degree?
So I think for me as well, it would have been an unexpected change. And I've talked to you about this before as well. But when I was really young, I always had this question in my mind. So if you asked me to draw a house, I could draw it because I learned how to draw a house before. If you asked me to sing a song, I could sing it because I'd heard the song before. But if you asked me to draw something from scratch, or if you asked me to record a new song, I would be frozen. I would be like, how do people create something new? And that was a question that was always in the back of my head, and I kept thinking about it. But then I obviously let it go, and I ended up pursuing or aspiring to be an astrophysicist as well, like much like you when I was a few years before when you were at that time, because I was in high school and I was aspiring to be a physicist, and I was like, I would get into astronomy, the big NASA dream. And unfortunately, though, as I was just about to embark on that, we had a shocking experience with our family, and I decided to stay here to support them. And what ended up happening was that as I was filling out the college applications for my brother, I came across this degree for artificial intelligence and computer science. I was like, I know computer science, but I haven't seen this new aspect that well. Like, I don't know this that well. Let me try it out. And then I tried it. And then, the moment when your code runs and your output comes out and you see it's something that you created, it answered that first question I had in my mind, that can I create something new? And I just did with just a piece of code. And I think that's like the most inspiring aspect for computer science for me. When I've had that realization, when I had that feeling, I was like, okay, I would like to stick with this. I would like to go along with this because computer science itself, I can use that as my tool to create something new in any department, in any field. So yeah, that kind of helped me to like go forward with computer science as well. But I think for you, your growth for computer science must have been like, I think you grew along with technology, didn't you? Like, because I remember you told me in our previous meeting where you were still handing out paper memos, and now of course everything's on email. So like, how was it for you? Like, going through that, literally visualizing and observing the changes that happened with technology entering all of workforces.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, over the last, I mean, I've been in the workforce for 25 years now, and when I first started work, you were still sending written, printed paper memos around an office to communicate information. We certainly didn't have email that went externally. We had an internal kind of mainframe email system that we could communicate between colleagues. I mean, when I think back now, it's actually very alien. And in fact, even when I started university, you didn't have an email address. And I actually had an email address because I joined the kind of geeky maths and physics student society. So if you joined that, you got an email address, but it wasn't standard for, students to get, email addresses. And I had friends that went through their whole 4 years of university and never had an email address, which for you now must just sound really bizarre.
I made my email address at like 8, 9. So I can't even imagine it.
It's a whole different world. And so you're right, the technological advancements I've seen, my own industry have been absolutely, incredible in the last 25 years. And that's both internally in terms of actually how you operate in an organization and the tools and actually skills as well that you need to be able to operate in that environment. And so very much kind of internal operationally, grabbing that technology and using it as an enabler to do your job better and to work more effectively and to communicate better with people. But also on the outside, actually the impact that has had on customers and on lives of people, externally around the world, frankly. And if we think about, how much financial services has changed in that time, it's very, 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 very different. And quite interesting, I was reflecting actually last night about my experience of when I first went to work overseas nearly 20 years ago now, actually, when I first went to Germany, and I had to set up a bank account. And, I had to go into a physical branch. I had to meet with I don't know if it was the bank manager, but certainly somebody, a person. I had to sit down, I had to fill out a paper form. Then a few days went by and they mailed things out to me and, sent things back. And it took days to set up a bank account. I had to wait for the physical card to appear in the snail mail. Whereas if I fast forward to, today, 2021, I'm about to embark on moving again overseas for my job, and I've had to set up a bank account. I've been able to do it already. I've been able to do it on this and and it happens within seconds, and I get my electronic debit card sent to me on my phone. So actually as a customer of financial services, that experience has changed a lot, and it makes us much more obviously connected to the world, but also to, I guess, what we're expecting and the pace of how we're expecting that to happen and for action to happen. And so I think, I certainly noticed that's been huge change, and that will continue to evolve. Financial services will have to continue to evolve to meet customers' needs. And actually for, people like myself working in that, we have to be part of that and part of that journey and make it happen. I suppose the flip side of that is obviously increase in technology and particularly using smartphones and, sort of online accounts means there's a greater risk as well. Greater risk in terms of, cyber security, and even on actually the kind of ethical side of how we're collecting data about people. Actually, all of that presents really fresh and interesting challenges for all of us as well. So though we're saying, technology is going to mean that machines can do our jobs instead of human beings, actually, if anything, it means that the role of us as human beings in that system are changing and, and supporting that evolution, so that, we now need people to think about cybersecurity and the risks, associated with that. And of course, actuaries are all about risk. So for us actuaries, that's great. But actually, it's that sort of evolution. So while we might be changing the way we do things through technology, it changes the environment, and we have to be able to respond to that and, grab the opportunities that presents. I think it's a very exciting place to be at the moment, and indeed in the future as well. And that will continue to move on.
Yeah, I think as we grow technology, there's also the risks that are growing. And as you said, I think we kind of consider the idea of technology as a center and it's growing, but it's actually the humans itself that should be at the center point, and it should be our passion and our humanity that kind of controls the growth and monitors the growth of technology as well. That's why even as a student, I know like when we are doing our projects and we collecting data, we have to deal with GDPR, we have to deal with how do we handle the data and all of this. This awareness, I think it's like the most important aspect. I feel like being aware of data privacy laws, about when we create the algorithms, because I think as we create and write algorithms, before we do that, we need the proper risk management. And that's where roles like actuary or risk managers come the most important. People need to realize that along with the optimism of an innovation, there's also like the realistic nature of what can happen next.
Yeah. Absolutely. And some of the points you've just touched on there, around legal aspects and the ethical aspects, some of those things require human judgment. It's not necessarily something that we can, train a machine to do. Maybe eventually we can, I don't know. But at the moment, those things still require a bit of human judgment. And that becomes quite philosophical in that it's about, actually kind of morality in some ways, and actually what's right and wrong, and, and being able to make a judgment call about that. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot about, what the social media companies are doing and how they are, they're trying to control the flow of information and then make sure what's going on in their world is, is appropriate, and actually policing that to a certain extent, and, people's accounts being closed down. And actually for those sort of things, there's a real sort of judgment call that does actually require that human side, doesn't it? And that, it's all about actually what we as human beings regard as sort of right and wrong, or, an appropriate. And particularly when it comes to using people's data. So I think that's an area that will continue to, expand. I think will create some very interesting, career opportunities for people that are interested in that side of it. And we touched a little bit there on the sort of data collection side, but, obviously it's then starting to think a bit broader about, the impact that, how we collect data, how we then analyse it, and does that create any kind of bias that leads to, indirect discrimination in how certain things are done or how certain services are offered to people. So it's also having a broader view on potentially unintended consequences of how information and data is handled. And again, that's something that requires that human aspect and that human interpretation of how that data is used, and the application of it, which is very interesting. And I guess you must have touched on that a little bit in your undergraduate course as well. And I'm guessing the computer science courses now have a lot on ethics and risk.
Yeah, we have courses dedicated to ethics now. And I think that's really good, because as a computer scientist, we would probably just be engrossed in the idea of creating the algorithm itself, but not thinking about the risk that goes along with it. But I still feel like this is a really important opportunity for people who are not technically in STEM fields to be a part of STEM, because if you have philosophers, if you have lawyers, if you have people who are involved in ethics, in education ethics, in any ethics in a department, we need these people in STEM to guide us and innovate the technology. And I think that's where a lot of the diversity and inclusion comes from as well, not just based on our cultural backgrounds, but also like on the professional front, where it's important for us to be ethically diverse and ethnically diverse as well. So how has it been for you? Like, since you are like a seasoned professional, I'm sure you must have seen the effect data and how it affects based on whether there's proper inclusion or not, where there's no diversity, versus data that's collected from diverse backgrounds and as well, and also analyzed by diverse data scientists as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a couple of interesting things there. Actually, first point on, I suppose, how we're collecting and analysing data. And I know this is something that, the insurance industry, and certainly in the UK, that the insurance regulator here has been very keen to monitor. ensure that actually how the data is gathered and analysed and then utilised and applied is not going to disadvantage, certain groups and potentially exclude certain groups from, let's say, insurance, for example. If I use insurance as a great, analogy to this, one of the things that, insurance companies are trying to do is really try to, let's say, get a number on the risk that a particular customer might present to them in terms of insurance risk. And obviously the way you go about that is just by gathering lots and lots of data and analysing it. And actually over time, the richness of that data has significantly increased. So it means that, particularly actuaries, for example, have very sophisticated models that will start to really drill down on the risk that individuals present. Now, in some ways, there's a bit of tension there between that and the concept of pooling risk in an insurance. But also, if you go down to that level of detail, doesn't mean that you get to a point where you actually potentially exclude certain customers from accessing that insurance because insurance companies decide they don't want to take that risk on because they know too much about them. So there's actually a very, almost kind of natural tension there that needs to be managed properly, and that actually getting access to that data isn't going to somehow then, exclude people from it. And obviously we're kind of straying into the world of data privacy as well at that point. So that's certainly something that for us in the insurance industry, we're very, very conscious of, and actually making sure that, we are being inclusive, particularly when it comes to customers. The other point you mentioned there, which I think is an interesting one to explore, is around, I suppose, almost kind of diversity of thought. So touch there on sort of different professionals, but actually having, this kind of diversity of professionals. There might be a lot of people watching our video today who think they might want to get into a technology career, but are thinking they might not be able to do it because they think they're not good at math, so they're not good at numbers, or actually they're not scientific, and actually that's just not how their brain operates. And I think one of the great things about technology is this is not just about you and me that are good with numbers and like playing with computers all day and whatever, but actually, the technology sector requires people with a whole range of skills and backgrounds. So if you're a lawyer, for example, well, we spoke there about, ethics and actually some of the legal constraints around, data. I think we need lawyers to be able to do that. We need people who've got legal brains and, like you mentioned, philosophical brains as well, to be able to address some of those issues. If you think about even a very simple website design, well, actually that requires more kind of creative, more artistic people. So for me, technology and trying to particularly get women into technology is not just about people that like computers and people that like, playing with numbers and actually even have just analytical skills, but actually other types of skills as well. And for me, it's very much, kind of the full breadth of interests and skills that should be getting brought to the table, and certainly in technology. And that offers such a huge opportunity actually to everybody. To me, it shouldn't just be about people that think, oh, I'm not going to do STEM subject at university. I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to do history, or I'm going to do philosophy we spoke about, or even languages. Actually, all of those things are needed, and I think technology, kind of careers, if you like, offer all of those things. I really, hammer that home to some of the people that are watching today, and not to just think, oh, I'm not doing computer science, I can't get into technology. And actually, we're all going to have to, embrace technology in some shape or form, even in our personal lives, as well as in our careers. But I think it offers a huge opportunity. And actually, it's when those different disciplines and the different professions come together that it becomes very, very powerful, and that you've actually got the people that can go off and do the coding combined with the people that know how to make it look pretty and how to make it look visually appealing to customers, working with the people that can ensure that it remains legal and that, doing it in an ethical way. And that's actually how, in some ways, just like running any business, that we require, people with lots of different types of skills and experience to be able to make it happen. And it's not just about people that do STEM subjects or people are really into technology in the first place. So Megha, I don't think we could have this interview today without mentioning COVID and actually the impact that that's had on the world, and obviously the potential opportunities that has presented, certainly when it comes to technology. But actually, interested from your point of view how you found it, because obviously you're in the middle of doing your university degree and all of a sudden everything ends up having to go online, but you're a computer science undergrad, so you should be able to embrace all of that technology. Actually, how has it been for you? And actually, have you got any thoughts about what this means for the future, and particularly with regard to technology?
I can 100% stand by the statement that COVID has permanently changed the whole flow of humanity and technology for at least a quite like some significant amount of time for now. Just last year, I was nicely going to university. We heard some background news about a pandemic beginning somewhere. Pandemics come and go, it's fine. And then suddenly we get an email that schools shut down, no more university, everything's online, and everyone's scared. Everyone's so shocked. I think that's the first experience we had. And I honestly feel for the students who graduated that year and even this year, because they faced not just an entire pandemic, because they had their own expectations about going for a job or aspiring for another degree, and it suddenly things are halting for them. And it almost brought me back to the point when I had at high school, when at my personal point, when everything halted for me and I had to like retrack everything. So it brought back that fear. But I think because we were going through this together as the world, there was so much work done by essential workers, by technology itself, that gave us that sort of hope. Because even though I essentially lost in touch with so many people I've met in real life all day, but then I could connect to them again, all kinds of technology. I could go up and call them. I could go up and video call them, in fact, as well. And this is all possible because of technology. So I think in my mind that stayed there. But even in education wise, like everything was online. The whole environment of the class, that you have when you're sitting together as peers and you're learning something together, it's completely ripped off because right now you're sitting at your own room, you're sitting on a table chair, and you're just watching a PPT and you're watching someone trying to explain it. And you can imagine how stressful that is, not just for the students but also the faculty to both manage the engagement as well as the quality education. But I think honestly, I was thinking about the same thing like just a few days back. Where I was thinking that if this pandemic had happened 6 years ago, there would have nowhere been a close approach in terms of bringing normalcy back as we had this time. Because the half of technologies that we use today to fund our quarantine, to fund the social distancing, didn't even exist back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most important because you know how necessity is the mother of invention. It's like we are so grateful that these things became necessary before the pandemic began so that we've already were equipped with that. And even throughout the pandemic, our technology has been innovating so far ahead that we got the chance to not feel as alone as we would have been before. As a student, even though we cannot bring back the entire classroom environment, of course, but it did not make me feel as alone because I could just go on and talk to my friends online or something like that. But even education wise, keeping up the quality of education, I think that's the most important aspect, even for an education institution and for faculty as they planned. They had to completely revamp their courses. All our practical classes were gone. We had only lecture sites, and we were doing things by ourselves. Even though it's aided by someone on call with you, if you're having to do it, it still feels like you're just doing it by yourself. Right? So I think at this point, one of my biggest realizations was the fact that none of this would have been possible without technology. But at the same time, the technology cannot take away the humanity in us. It cannot take away what we genuinely yearn from other people, from being around people, from having a community. So there's definitely a key takeaways for me. But what about I know for you as well, because I know how difficult it is to work with data and the exploding amount of data and the conversation around data has increased so much since COVID because even a layman is talking about how is this data collected, how is this there. And since you work with data yourself, did it change your opinion on data itself or did it like sort of encourage something new, a new thought in you?
Like you were saying, we've been able to sort of continue to function as a world, if you like, because of technology. And that certainly, like you say, certainly does not replace the human aspect. And we've now all learned that. And what I would also say is that it has also rapidly accelerated a mindset change in how we operate. And that, I think some of the technological advances that we've seen would have come eventually, but it may have had to overcome, sort of psychological barriers, if you like, from the users to be able to do that and to move into where we are now. And I think we are all still yearning to go back to being able to have face-to-face, certainly meetings and certainly face-to-face social interactions, with our friends and colleagues and family members. The data side is very interesting because obviously there's been a whole raft of new, data sources that will have been created as a result of us all working online. I mean, the fact that we, are talking talking to get today, our video has been recorded. I mean, that presents a lot of interesting challenges and about how that data is stored, what happens to it, and again, we're sort of straying into the sort of ethical side of things as well. But then also, we've even seen how, even the tracking of COVID cases, has led to sort of developments in terms of how that information is gathered, the challenges, and I think, I think every government in the world has done it differently in terms of how they've been gathering information on, where the COVID cases are and how that's then managed and how that's used in decision making. And I think there's been a lot of lessons learned and a lot of best practice that could probably be shared further down the line. I think once everyone's had a chance to reflect on what's happened, and in some ways that, suddenly being forced into the situation that we're in at the moment, and then being, a position where we actually rely very heavily on data to be able to make decisions. And I say we as in society, and particularly governments, having to make some very, very important public health decisions based on data. That's becoming incredibly important. And I think, certainly early on in the pandemic, I think everybody was just finding their feet and trying to understand what was there, and actually how to interpret that data properly. And I suppose it takes us into another kind of interesting area, which is around actually how that data is then interpreted by members of the public and the media, and how data is analysed and communicated to different stakeholder groups. And I think probably every country in the world has had information pushed to them by their different media outlets, and the media outlets have analysed information and presented it in a certain whatever way they want, which has potentially led to members of the public making decisions or forming certain judgments about the situation. And in some ways, the COVID and the existence of a lot of the data that's been around relating to COVID, or about actually just what's been going on in the world generally, has probably reminded us about the care we need to take over how information is first of all gathered, how it's analysed, and then also how it's presented back to audience groups. And in fact, how that's presented back to audience groups can potentially change decisions and actions in a good or bad way. And I know that where I am in the world, there's often been some concerns about how certain statistics were being presented by media outlets, and then how that would then lead to certain actions and certain behaviours from members of the public, which I think is very interesting. It's that, that data is, driving behaviour. And again, it comes back to human beings, doesn't it? But the data is driving human behaviour. And think back to some, even a year ago, where people were running off into grocery stores and trying to stockpile. It was actually toilet paper that was the item of choice that they were stockpiling in the UK. And actually, basically, big supermarkets had their supply chains sorted out. They knew they were going to be able to supply the right amount of, essentials, but yet human beings didn't trust that and still had to go in and stockpile. And so I think it's quite interesting actually about how, people interpret that data and use it, and it ultimately drives sort of human behaviour. I think that's something there'll probably be lots of research done on that in the coming years actually, which I think will be very interesting to see. And again, it's all been rooted in data and information.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think now that data is such a publicly talked about aspect, it's a publicly talked about term, it's also important that we're aware of how the public itself perceives this data as well, and how it's shown. Because coming from like a science background, a mathematics background, the way we understand statistics will be very different from the way a general person would understand statistics.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the conversation is like so important, because if we are like displaying all this data to the general public, how do we create it in a digestible format that's also equally understandable to them?
Yeah.
So that's definitely an important thing. And I think there should be a lot of research that should be done. I think there's already a lot of extensive, interest in research that's going on with this. But you yourself, you not just had a successful career in corporations, but you've also led a research life. Is there anything that inspired you that to go for both research as well? Or did you notice any key differences as you were working in the different aspects of the actuary?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one would say is that I guess how it, ended up on certainly the research side was that what I've always done with my career is I've just done things that have interested me. And actually, actuaries as a professional group tend to be quite kind of curious animals anyway. We are kind of motivated by having interesting things to do and sort of exploring new things and solving problems. And so that, largely how I sort of ended up going down that route. And actually, even in the commercial sector, we're kind of there to kind of help make people's lives better, in that we're there to ensure that people have enough money for their retirement, that they're insured if the worst happens. And actually, it still comes down to that kind of guess, that aspect of, ensuring that human beings are being looked after in a sort of financial sense, and that actually as a profession has a sort of kind of public interest role to what it does. And so actually my involvement in the research was actually coming at it from that angle, and about the, I guess the role that I think actuarial science has to play in society, whether that is about understanding financial aspects for individuals or companies, and particularly in terms of the future, and ensuring that they're sort of financially secure, or even on sort of bigger ticket items like, for example, the impacts of climate change and sort of changing environmental factors. And so that kind of sense that you're part of a bigger picture and that you've got a sort of role to play in society is something that's sort of always motivated me. But what I've always tried to do is I've just kept doing things I enjoy, and I've just looked for things that I enjoy. And I guess that's a message that I'd probably say to people watching, regardless of what your interests are, is actually keep doing things you enjoy. And your teachers at school have probably told you this already, but actually if you keep doing the subjects you enjoy at school, it will lead you on to a career that you will enjoy as well. And that may be, going through university first, it may be going straight into the world of work from school, but actually if you keep doing things you enjoy, eventually it will take you to a job or a career that you will enjoy. And I've certainly, found that to be the case. And I know for other people that has been the case. And that would be my kind of, I guess, my message for people is to just keep doing things you enjoy. Yeah. And actually what you get you out of bed in the morning and what subjects interest you, because that will eventually lead you to, a career that will find very satisfying. And I've got a whole range of friends that have gone through different career paths, and some of them, have gone kind of the long way round to get there, but have actually continued to try and follow their passion, whatever that might be. And so that would probably be my advice for people. But what lies ahead for you, Megha, in terms of your next steps and what you're thinking about for your future career in technology?
So, of course, I think this is the most daunting question for any student when they ask you what's next. But as you said, I think in the beginning of the year, I was really almost stressed out about what I should do in the future, like what I should plan out. Because, with the pandemic, with the situation right now in the world, there's a growing fear that, things may change all of a sudden, and plans that you have may not work out. So having a plan, having a backup plan, having a backup plan on that, it stresses me out. But I think the last time we met actually, and you gave me this piece of advice where you were like, you go for something that would make you happy, that kind of thing hit me, because there's already a point of connection, right? We both studied at Heriot-Watt University. I don't think we mentioned that here before, but we both studied at Heriot-Watt, and that kind of grounded me that you built your career onwards from that path as well. And even now, when I'm building my own career, I can look forward to a position or even to an education role where I get to something that I want to do. And for now, I think I'm sharing a lot of interest in deep learning, and I really want to go, further into the algorithms itself and how can we use these algorithms to create, as you said, we can use technology for whatever. And for me, I think of it more as a creative outlet for my own, interests and stuff. And I want to be able to see how do we create deep learning mechanisms that not only creatively output something, but also that can benefit the humanity as well. So with research on that, a job on any position that can help me grow that aspect of my intuition or curiosity, I think I would like to go for that. Before we wrap this up, because I was about to ask you a piece of advice, but I think you already gave such a marvelous message for everyone here. And I'm sure everyone can take away a good idea of what it is to be a part of technology, both coming from you as an established woman and also as a young girl who's just starting out. Is there anything you'd like to add? Is there anything you'd like to say before we end the talk?
My final comment, and just like kind of building on some of the points you've just said there, is actually just keep an open mind in terms of learning. You don't stop learning. So just because once you've finished your undergraduate degree, that doesn't mean it's the end of learning. Even if you decide not to do a professional qualification or a PhD or anything else, keep an open mind that you're always learning, and be open to learning new things and grabbing that as well. And actually, that's not just about learning in terms of your sort of narrow discipline, but actually learning about things that are much broader than perhaps your own interests. Yeah, I actually find it quite inspiring to read like autobiographies and biographies of business leaders and maybe sort of well-known sports people, and who have all had different challenges in life, and it's great learning from other people and learning from their experience as well. It's just different ways of learning, but I think keeping that open mind is really, really important, and being open to learning forever, learning for the rest of your life, whether that's in your work career or in your personal life. And that's probably my kind of parting comment.
That actually reminded me, because you said learning, and I know you're really passionate about learning as well. Is there any other passion that you're following, any hobbies that you're following that facilitate your curiosity, grow your interests?
Well, I have a 3.5-year-old son, so a lot of my hobbies are spent running after him. And it's actually quite scary that the world that he's growing up in is very different to the one that I grew up in, where he has TV programs on demand. He knows the word Netflix. When I was his age in the UK, we only had 4 TV channels, and children's TV was only on for about an hour a day, so it's quite a different world.
So that's a huge challenge by itself.
My hobbies are about keeping up with him at the moment.
That's really intense. But even then, you and definitely an exemplary achievement of your careers, of jobs and positions, but not just that, but also of knowledge and skills that you brought in throughout your career. And I think that's an exemplary feat. And I'm so honored to be able to interview and talk with you someone like that, and with you specifically. And I'd just like to end this off by saying that I hope that anyone who is watching this felt a tiny bit of representation from either of us, or any felt a bit of motivation for what STEM and for technology, because technology is not going anywhere, but I'm sure that we ourselves can definitely help in the growth of the direction of the growth that we wanted to go for individually as well. And thank you so much, Sarah, for having me and allowing me to interview you. I hope I've been a good interviewer.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Megha. You've been a fantastic interview, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we will wrap this up now, and we'll end this. Thank you.